So, like I said, for anyone just joining us now, this is the Rustic Pathways Q&A with our parent alumni. Um, that's me. My name's Connor. I'm one of our global program advisors here at Rustic Pathways. So just a brief introduction about me as the moderator of the event tonight. I've been a global program advisor now for the last 5 years. So what that means is essentially I help parents and students make a decision about what program is the best fit for them. My history with Rustic Pathways is I've worked for about 5 years in about 15 different countries with Rustic Pathways. So I've worked in the United States, Dominican Republic, Morocco, Tanzania, Fiji, Australia, Thailand. So I've sort of been all over the map. And now when people call in just questions about what's the food like, or tell me about safety in Tanzania, I'm sort of the person that helps answer a lot of those questions. But as we go into the webinar and what we're going to be doing today, I'll go into a little bit about who Rustic Pathways is, just if you're new to Rustic in general. Then we'll get to the meat and bones of the webinar itself, which is talking to Melissa and David. Then we'll take some of your questions. I said this at the beginning of the webinar, but at any time during the webinar, if you have questions, you'll see a little button at the bottom that says Q&A. Just drop your question in there. My colleague Emily will be answering some individual questions. And if there's a good question for the whole group to hear, she'll then let me know and I'll ask David and Melissa. And then we'll go over how to enroll and any final wrap-up stuff. So the quick introduction about Rustic Pathways, if you're new to Rustic as a whole. We're a student travel organization. We've been around for just shy of 4 decades now. And we're really the intersection between education, travel, and philanthropy. So obviously people find us because they're really excited to sort of have an experience either in the United States or abroad. They want sort of that cross-cultural exploration or adventure. But we also want to make sure that it not only is educational for our students, that they're getting some personal growth out of the program itself, but we also want to make sure that we're doing good things for the communities that we're operating. So about 70 to 75% of our programs have some kind of volunteer or community service element to it. It's just something that makes Rustic Pathways really unique in the travel industry and just the travel, student travel realm, that we're really big advocates for sustainable long-term development in the regions that we're in. We want to make sure that the program is fun, enjoyable, educational for our students when they're there for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks on the ground. But we also want to make sure that we're doing something good for the community because we're there just more than 2 weeks. We want to be there for 1 year, 5 year, 20 years, and making sure that we set up our programs so they're just as good for our students as they are for the folks on the ground. So that's a really brief introduction about Rustic Pathways. I can talk about Rustic Pathways for days. But I'll get into like the major component of our webinar tonight, which is talking to our guests, David and Melissa. Hey, David. Hey, Melissa. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
Awesome. Thanks. Melissa is joining us tonight from Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is just right outside of DC. David is down in Dallas. And then I'm hosting tonight from Portland, Oregon. So we're covering most of the coasts of the US. David has actually had 3 students travel with us. His 2 sons, William and Jackson, and his daughter, Claire. And they did programs with us in Costa Rica, Cambodia, Peru, Fiji, India, and they did our mystery trip. And then Melissa's daughter, Lucy, traveled with us to Australia last year. And she's going on a program this year in the Dominican Republic. So that's sort of their background with Rustic Pathways. I'll jump right into it and I'll ask David first. So David, why did you choose or why did you want your child or your students to travel in the first place?
I just think I'm a big fan of travel. And I think, seeing how the rest of the world lives, whether it be in India where there's no electricity or Thailand, just different cultures, you learn so much that you don't get in a textbook. And my kids had always gone to just regular summer camp. And my oldest came up to me and he's like, Dad, I can shoot a BB gun and ride a horse and sail. What else is there? So he actually sparked it. He was 12 at the time. And So a woman in my office is like, you've got to look at Rustic Pathways. It's been great for my daughter. So we looked and we just started and never stopped. So I think all in, we probably did with 3 kids. I bet we totaled almost 15 trips, and they've seen more of the world than I've ever seen. And so we loved it. And, my kids are kind of growing out of it now. I got 2 in college and 1 is on to other things, but I highly recommend it. I'm not a paid spokesman, by the way. In fact, I pay them quite a bit to go on the trips, but it's worth every penny.
Awesome. Yeah. And Melissa, why, how did you find Rustic Pathways, or why did you think it was going to be a good fit for your daughter?
Agreeing with David, I always traveled, but with my family and with my 2 sisters and parents, and my daughter's an only child. She goes to sleepaway camp, but wanted to add the trip in. And my daughter had found lots of trips she wanted to go on that were more touristy and didn't have a service component. And I really wanted to get the service component wrapped in. So I started researching the trip when she was about 12. And I knew my daughter would choose something big. She always does the extreme. And so I told her, we found Rustic Pathways because I had just heard of a few people randomly and asked them if they liked it in my community. Nobody who was an actual friend. And they all said it was a fantastic experience. So then I did my research. I talked to a few people at Rustic Pathways, and we chose Rustic, and that's how we started. And my daughter, I kind of had to convince her that she said, I want to go with a friend. It got logistics got too crazy. So I said, you can choose any trip you want. She said, that's fine, because if that's the only way I'm going. And she chose Australia, and she was 14, which made me a little bit nervous, but it all worked out. And the day she got back, she said, Mom, I'll go and I'll choose my other trip right now, so I don't have to worry about the rest of the summer. And she chose her next one.
Awesome. Well, that is something that I want to ask both of you about too is, obviously this is a big decision for parents. A lot of times we see parents, it's either their first time traveling without their son or daughter, and you're just giving your student up to an organization that maybe you've heard about before, but you don't have that experience. So what kind of made you nervous as a parent before you traveled? And how would you sort of give advice to other parents who are, in your same shoes a year ago or a couple years ago for you, David? I'll ask Melissa first. But what do you think, what were you nervous about, and how did you sort of address those nerves prior?
I was nervous. My daughter had been flying alone since she was about 8 years old. So I wasn't nervous. She's very independent. She's a very secure kid, very social. And of course, really tied into her iPhone, everything like that. So I wasn't worried about the communication. I was worried more so just about a 14-year-old going to LA, meeting up in an airport with a chaperone. And then I found out if your kid is 15 or under, they have a Rustic Pathway representative, which was awesome. They give you a cell phone that was meeting at the gate. Once I found out about that, I was a lot less nervous. And I was also nervous about health issues. And so what I did, and it worked out very nicely, is I got a lot of, and this is something I highly recommend, a lot of prescription drugs, even from my daughter, as well as non-prescription. I had just talked to some friends about this, and I got a whole little kit made up for her, which proved to be perfect. Because when she got back from sleepaway camp, she actually had a cough, and she was going to Australia. And I'm like, what am I going to do if it doesn't go away? And she texted me, and I would advise just making sure your kid's phone has international. And she told me, Mom, I'm still coughing. And so I texted her to start the Z-Pack. And within 24 hours, she was, completely better. And it worked out really nicely. I just think preparing for something you're nervous about, whatever it is,
Awesome. And David, same question for you. So what were you maybe nervous about the first time, before?
So the first time we weren't very nervous because we started small, kind of opposite than what Melissa did. So our kid was 12 and we're like, okay, 3 weeks in Costa Rica, worst case scenario, I've been to Costa, it's not Fiji, it's not Australia or Thailand or wherever it is. So, but I did a lot of research on the safety part of it and was perfectly comfortable kind of just shipping them, especially after you've done it your first year. And Melissa can back me up here. It's like, you trust Rustic Pathways. And one quick story, my son was going to Fiji And so we had to fly from, they tell you to get to LAX, let's say 6 hours before your international flight, which is important because there's only 2 flights a week to Fiji. So there are some weather delays. He barely gets to LA on time, but the travel chaperones, for lack of a better word, for Rustic somehow got him there. He didn't have luggage for the whole trip because, the trip wasn't very long. And so they stopped at the 7-Eleven or whatever the Fijian equivalent of a 7-Eleven is. And he had the same hat, shorts. We didn't know he didn't have his luggage because when our kids went, and I don't know if it's different now, but they were totally unplugged. I mean, they had phones, and in emergencies, they could always get us. But we thought part of the beauty of it was, hey, we moved houses one time, and my son didn't know it because he was 6 weeks away with Rustic Pathways, and he comes back and we're in a new house. It was a weird situation, but if you need them, you can get them. But part of, I thought, the great, especially with kids these days, is, yes, in emergency, I can call my mom or dad if I need to, but the leaders on the ground have handled probably way more stuff than I have just because of their experience in the field. So after the first trip, we really weren't nervous. All the research I did showed no issues. It's not like, oh, look out for Rustic. They had a kid, get really sick or something happen, so I was not nervous after the first trip at all. So you kind of just go with your gut.
I just want to add that I think it may be different, and I don't want to be gender biased, but I know they said, they give you so many activities and they bond so much with you. My daughter said the quality of the chaperones was very high, and and the quality of the children. And sometimes I was like, where are you? Why aren't you texting me? Unplug more. But they do, I think it has changed a little bit from what David said, evolved maybe. And maybe it's just a little different, I don't know. But my daughter definitely texted me usually once a day, just saying, Mom, we're going here today. I'll check in with you before I go to bed. I mean, they're not, if anyone's worried that they're going to say, put your phone away, don't use it. They don't do that. But typically, your kid doesn't want to use it because they're having so much fun and they don't.
Agreed. The activities, they keep them so busy in this amazing new environment that, you've only seen on the internet or TV or whatever. The Cambodia and India were 2 of their favorites, and both of my kids went there. And, the pictures they brought home and the friends they meet on this, because even if your kid is, and it sounds like Melissa, both of our kids, or all 4 of them, they're independent. They've been traveling by themselves for a long time, but also on the trip are the kids that maybe aren't that independent, but they bond because it's usually pretty small groups. And, you bond. All right, we're all grown-ups here, but, my daughter met this great girlfriend that they were roommates with, and they bonded because neither of them had pooped in 4 days, right? International travel or whatever it is, and they get really tight, and the group is tight, and all my kids still stay in touch, even 5 years now after, with people from Rustic. So, all right, I'll be quiet.
My daughter has 2 girls she met from the DC area that she has lunch with, talks to on Snapchat every day. I mean, it was just luck, but I mean, she met a lot of interesting people. And I want to say that really starts in the airport. I would say more where they really do a good job in the airport of bonding everyone together. And I don't know if this is a good segue into another area, which is people always say, who did your daughter go with? And my daughter, being an only child, couldn't go with a sibling. And with other people, it's just really hard to coordinate a trip that is that expensive, that far away, that time frame. So I'm like, we're doing our own thing. And 90%, I've been told, and I believe is true from what my daughter's told me, 90% of the kids don't go with a friend, and which I didn't have any problem with. David, did your kids go with a friend or?
No, never. And I think that's the beauty of it. I would actually encourage you not to go with a friend. Not to tell y'all what to do, but, part of kids growing up is they got to figure out how to walk into a room or an airport lounge where everyone's wearing the same Rustic t-shirt, and you figure out on this 12-hour flight to way somewhere you've never been to of, you just figure it out. And it's other people that, again, may not be as independent, but by the end of the trip, everyone is very comfortable with each other. So we encourage them not to, like, we would have friends call us and like, oh, tell us where Will's going this summer. It'd be great for, Billy, his buddy. And we wouldn't tell him. We're like, well, we're not sure yet, because we didn't want Billy going, because part of the growing up in life is figuring things out on your own. And we were afraid that they would, if they're there with their best friend, those 2 are going to pal around and miss out on all the other fun. So I would encourage no friends.
And I've heard that the kids, my daughter, there was two girls, I think, that knew each other from, might have been California. And then she did tell me there was or maybe it was two sisters. They were, it wasn't as smooth as it was for the kids who didn't. I think it's just hard, like putting your
Right.
kids in one.
Yeah, and in general, so I think the actual statistics that we have at Rustic is about 75% of people travel on their own, 25% travel with a friend, more or less. So places a little bit closer, I think like your Costa Rica, Dominican Republic typically will have more people traveling with a buddy, just because I think maybe parents or students are a little bit more nervous. But anecdotally, as a trip leader, I agree. I think it's a really great opportunity for students to have sort of the chance that when you go off to college or have your first job, you're not going to know anyone else in the room. So it's really great to hear that perspective, that you think it was really beneficial to the students. Cool. I will ask another question. So going back to the idea of when they came back from Australia or India or Cambodia, did you see any kind of noticeable shift or change in any of your children after coming back from the program? And what would those be? And I'll start with David on this question.
Yeah. And this is going to sound corny. We live on the mean streets of West Plano, and so anyone who can afford this trip is probably in the same mean street neighborhood as I am, and so they have phones and they have running water and air conditioning, and your kids do change when they see that the whole world is not like this. It's one thing to watch a National Geographic on it, but when they, on one of the trips, and they all blend together for me, my daughter lived, I think it was Cambodia, her son, on a hut in the river, and they were raising crocodiles in cages below them. Connie, you probably know which trip that is, but it's there was no electricity, there was no running water. And so they get a taste of that. And again, it wasn't a bad experience. I think it makes them appreciate all that we currently provide for them. Not that my kids are spoiled, maybe a little spoiled, but so they came back with a different attitude of the whole world isn't like Dallas, Texas, where, you get a car when you're 16 or you get private school or whatever it was, and I thought that was really good. I didn't see he was walking funny strange, but the appreciation for what they have, I noticed in all three of my kids, and they all went on different, their ages none of them went together on the same trips, but they all kind of followed in each other's footsteps to different places. And one thing, I think in Thailand, they started building a library or school or something my son's year. And then 2 years later or 1 year later, my daughter went on that trip and she finished it, and so that was kind of cool that they both had a piece of building this thing for people that really needed it. And it's a cool little bond.
Awesome. And did you see anything coming back from Lucy, Melissa, when she came back from Australia?
She asked about the trip and she said, "Mom, it changed my life." She told me it changed her life and didn't communicate anything real specific. She told me all the intricacies of the trip, but my daughter is, I don't know how David feels, but they're on the younger side. She was 14, so she's still evolving, but she definitely opened her mind up to, living in a bush camp, just some of the things that she saw. To say the natural beauty, the community service, because they actually went to a trailer park, and that was a life-changing moment for her. She was telling me about, "Mom, can you believe people live this way?" I said, "Yeah, that is exactly right. You don't have to go to Soul Cycle for a $30 ride." You got to get running. You put it in perspective. And every once in a while, when I need to have one of those moments with her, I go, "I can't wait till you get back on that Rustic Pathways trip to make your mom this year." It's good. I like the continuous path of it also. I think when my daughter, she told me, "If I go on this trip and I don't like it, you can't make me go on another one." I said, "That is a fair deal," because I knew she was going to love it. And then I'm not kidding. The next day, I said, "Well, in the next 2 weeks, I kind of want you to just look at the trips because you're going to have a really busy freshman year in high school." The next day, like I told you guys earlier, she literally said to me, "Mom, I'm done. I chose that trip." That was it. Yeah.
One other thing. So my daughter, her last trip was last year, and she did a Pacific Adrenaline. And I don't know if that's still offered, but she'd never been skydiving because you have to be 18 over there. I think, I don't know what the rules are, maybe 16, but so, her sense of adventure, she had been wanting to do that trip since she was 12, and we wouldn't let her because it's one, more expensive trips, And we wanted her to go to India first and then Thailand or Peru or whatever it was. And this was like the culmination for her. And you'll probably talk about this, but I'd also encourage, and again, I'm not a paid spokesman, but you're spending so much money on the airfare, you should really look at, if you're comfortable with it, linking 2 trips together. Because, traveling basically 2 days to get to Fiji and staying 6 days and traveling 2 days back is great, but it's better if you, after the 6-day surfing trip or whatever they do, then they go on a 12-day explore the Fiji countryside trip. So, Con, I'm sure you'll talk about that, but it's just more bang for your buck.
Totally. It's I don't think all parents really realize that even before, signing up for a program, is the way we design everything is every program in each country is designed to connect with one another. So, they'll begin and end on the same day. It looks on the website or the catalog like they overlap by a couple days, but in country, they all begin and end on the same day. So you don't miss a day of either trip. The reason we set up our programs like that at Rustic Pathways, it used to be 20 years ago, we would just run like 4 or 5 week trips, so it would be 2 weeks of adventure, 1 week of working with turtles, and 1 week of language immersion in like one package. And what we found was that people were signing up for the program because they wanted to just work with turtles. And then the 2-week portion of the trip that was adventure based, they just were kind of checked out. Or the 1 week program that was based in like language immersion, like they had no interest in. And that really affects the dynamic of the group. So we changed our programs to be a little bit more a la carte style. So if all you want to do, or all you can spend time do during the summer is 1 week in Fiji, great. We're really big advocates, like spend that 1 week in Fiji then. But if you can spend 2 or 3 weeks in Fiji and you have multiple different passions, it's a really great way to sort of link up maybe a little bit of adventure, maybe a little bit of, environmental service and a little bit of education service. Like you can sort of mix and match and create whatever kind of opportunity that you want. So being a trip leader for so long, I remember opening that catalog and being like, I want to do every trip. Mm-hmm. And, I've been here for 10 years. I've done about 50 programs and I'm still not through the catalog yet. You're never going to get through them all, but literally there's not like a better or worse option at Rustic. It really is about, sort of finding just like what you're most passionate about, which actually kind of leads me into like a question for both of you too. Like, how did y'all decide? I know, Melissa, you said Lucy just like picked Australia was the one that she felt really appealed to her, but how much did you interact with that like decision-making process, and how did you come to the conclusion that like Australia was the best fit for her?
Yeah, in the beginning, because she was on the younger end, 14, and I'm not overprotective, but she wanted to go, I think, to Thailand, or I didn't want her going to one of those countries. In that kind of India, Thailand, I wanted her to the first trip just to go to more English speaking, somewhere where I felt a little bit more comfortable. So I ruled out a few things, and then I said, you can choose any trip. And I'm just kind of segueing on what David said. I'm like laughing. Of course, my daughter chose the most expensive the first year. I said, I decided though to let that go because I wanted it. I think it's really important to let your child, if they're going to do this program, you do the first round of saying, okay, here are your choices. You're closed end, and within that scope. She knew right away. She loves surfing. She doesn't like I like the way they do the classifications, and I think that resonates with the kids. My daughter would love to do Costa Rica, but she doesn't like things like, she's very outdoorsy, but more of a beach. She didn't want to do adventure, zip lining, hiking. That's just not her thing. So what Connor said really resonated with my daughter. So she was able to narrow it down into the different categories she wanted to do. And she said, that's it. I'm going to Australia. It wasn't really going back and forth. She just knew what she wanted to do. And I said, okay, and that was it. I recommend doing the 16 days though. I think it's a really good amount of time, whether you do 2 separate ones. I think if your kid is 12 or 13 in middle school, it would probably make sense to do like a 1 week. But I think once they're going into high school, I really recommend a longer trip. I don't think everything that goes into it would have panned out as well for a much shorter trip.
Yeah.
All right. In full disclosure, I know I said I'm not a paid spokesman, but they did send me a free sweatshirt last year, Rustic Pathway. So I want to be honest with everybody out there. So I am getting compensated for this. It's so comfy. I want another one. Anyway, so we let the kids choose everything. The first time we chose because we didn't know Rustic, and we're like, all right, somewhere close in 12 days. And so that's Costa Rica. And all my kids have different, so they all went different places. My son wanted to see India. My daughter wanted to climb Machu Picchu. Then she had been pining for the adrenaline one, which is that was really a great way for us to top off her Rustic experience, because she liked all the outdoor fun stuff. But the pictures I have of her like rappelling down a waterfall in where I don't even know what country she was in, but it's like, these are amazing stuff. These are amazing. So, we let them choose. And I think maybe after your first one, give them all the freedom that they want, if you're comfortable with it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's right. Like we'd look at them, and I wished I trip. I was like, can I go on a Rustic?
Awesome. And I'll ask a question that we always get all the time from other parents. Is just about, people are always concerned about health or safety on the program. It's like the biggest obstacle, I think, for parents thinking about sending their student like overseas. Did either of you have any experience with like a health or safety issue? Did you feel like was it handled appropriately or well, or anything that happened like that, maybe either for your child on the ground or someone else on their trip?
Yeah, I did. It's funny now. It wasn't funny when it happened. I happened to be in Colorado. All our kids were on trips. And so it makes for a nice summer if you're married or not married. It didn't, whatever, you get it, with no kids around, if you're used to 3 of them being around. So I got a text. And again, we'd never talked or texted to any of our kids on any of their trips. And this was probably our 8th trip. And there's some setting on the Samsung phone, which my youngest son had. He must have been 14 at the time or 13. And it's basically, help SOS, and it sends the longitude and latitude. It's for when you get kidnapped. And I immediately get this, and I am freaking out. And so I call my wife in Dallas. I'm like, did you get this? What is it? And I'm trying to call his phone. It's not working. I'm calling the airlines to somehow get to the Dominican Republic, and go Rambo to find my kid. But then I calmed down, and I simply called Rustic Pathways. They have a phone number who they can get directly in line with whoever's on the ground with them. And so in about 10 minutes, the whole thing had been solved, where, I talked to the trip leader who was on the ground. I think they're in the Dominican. And, he's like, Jack is right here with me. To talk to him. Can you put him on the phone? Just, I'm trying to raise ransom money, who knows what's going on. And, but they handled it right away, because you can always talk to the leaders and your kid. And so that was really the only safety thing. And it turned out to be some kid playing a joke on his phone. They're never in danger. We never worried one bit about anything. So, you can take my word, or I'm sure you can research it yourself, but we had no issues whatsoever.
Awesome. Anything I know, Melissa, you mentioned that your daughter had a cough. Any other like health things or things that came up on her trip?
Yeah, because that's one thing that Rustic Pathways, they do tell you what kind of clothing to bring, but I think that would be the biggest value add of health, just educating the child, as long as they're obviously capable of doing these things, and explaining them. And like, I made a list and I wrote out which medications did what. So if she had allergies, whatever it was, explaining to her, because when she's at home, she would ask me, and I thought that was really valuable, because I have a friend whose daughter went on, it's another company like yours, but she had the same thing, and her daughter actually got sick, and she had that same type of thing. So she had that same thing that I did, the kit, and so she's the one who suggested it to me, and her daughter was able to work through it as well.
Awesome.
And I will say, so my daughter, I was talking to her, she's 18 now, and I'm like, I'm doing this webinar for Rustic, and excuse me, they loved it. All 3 of my kids loved every single trip they did. And I said, well, what advice would you give the other kids? And she's like, have an open mind, because you're going to meet people that aren't like you, but maybe more on the practical side. She's like, only pack what they tell you to pack. They've done this before. If anything, maybe bring 2 extra pair of underwear. It's like, you want to bring 19 t-shirts, but they're just going to get wasted. I mean, not the shirts, but it's like the packing list. If you end up going on Rustic, follow their little packing list guide because it's spot on.
Yeah, I wanted to add in one other thing. My daughter's good friend lives in the DC area now, who lives right near us. She went on the trip. She had, I really can't remember what it was, but she actually has like some special eating condition. It's not celiac, it's something. And they were really good about that with her on the trip. They were really good at like, and that I think if your kid does have some sort of serious allergy or food issue, that's when I would recommend going to more like an Australia or an America's trip where you can control that more. Because I remember her friend initially was going to maybe go to a different country, and then they talked to Rustic, and Rustic advised maybe keep her in something like Australia. And they were really good, the chaperones, and the food is pretty clear cut where you can actually work around those kind of things. And her friend had no issues at all. She brought her EpiPens and everything worked out, but they were very helpful. But I do recommend something more of an English speaking or
Awesome.
country.
Yeah, and it's a good segue just into, we actually had a question just pop up about food allergies, and I'll just answer that from the Rustic side. So even before you go on a program, you'll fill out like a medical form that says, you know, like I'm allergic to peanuts, or I have celiacs and can't have gluten, or I have a medication that needs to be refrigerated. If there's anything like that, always just let us know. Every single program goes through an evaluation for safety and risk management. So we know that a student with a severe peanut allergy is not going to be able to do a very rural program in Thailand. It's just too pervasive in Thai culture that we can't guarantee at some of the restaurants that we're eating at that you won't come into contact with it. Or if you have a refrigerated medication, you might not be able to climb Kilimanjaro just because we don't have refrigeration while we're climbing the mountain. So really good point just to sort of bring up, like if you have any of those like medical needs or dietary restrictions, just let us know so we can help, as Melissa said, maybe help with that narrowing down, you know, before you give students of like, okay, you have a peanut allergy, so you can't go to Thailand or Cambodia, and I want you to stay in maybe Latin America. So maybe look at these 4 countries. It's like a good.
I will say when my son was in, I think he was 17 at the time, the older kid, they were in India, and I think quite a few of the kids on the trip had a little deli belly, but that's just par for the course. I mean, and that's part of the experience, you know, so you sit on the toilet a lot, or I don't, you know, but they ate the food and nothing lasted more than a couple of days. And he has this not wonderful memory, but you know, the picture that we have hanging in our living room of him with the Taj Mahal in the background, he smiles because he's like, oh, my stomach hurt so bad when I took that, you know, and it just brings up memories. And again, nothing serious, like, you know, and if there was something serious, it's not like this their first time taking kids out of the country. And not only is there, you know, a chaperone that's traveling with them, there are also people local that have lived, like there's, who's the guy in Thailand that does all the trips? I mean, if you told me his name, no, it was like Billy Ty. You know, he lives there and he helps Rustic, or somebody in, you know, Johnny.
Bao
Who?
Bao Joe?
I don't know who it is, but it's like they're locals that know in case you need a hospital. I mean, we never had needed a hospital or anything like that. No one on the trip ever did. But, you know, it's not just a 20-year-old American taking 12 kids to India. It's a 22 or 3 20-year-old Americans, or I don't know how old, you know, they're younger than me, so they all seem 20. But when you go there, you're met by a local person. Connie, you may want to touch on that. Like in every country, there's somebody who's been living there for 50 years, and he helps drive them around and knows where to go, maybe where not to go. And if there was ever an emergency, he would know, or she would know where to go.
Yeah, so all of our programs are a mixture of local and non-local staff members. So you might get a non-local staff member like me. So I used to run like all of our animal conservation programs because that's what my background is in. So I can talk your ear off about, you know, captive species management at the Australia Zoo or at a panda conservation center, but I don't speak any Mandarin. So you want someone like me that can talk to the students about like what scientists and researchers are doing in the field here, but also you need trip leaders that know what Western China is like, and people that have experience in that area and in that region. So all of our trips are, you know, we're looking for what we call like leadership teams, so that we have like the actual like programming experience to make the educational content really positive for students, but also like the local knowledge and experience and expertise that help arrange everything and execute everything on the ground. It's another thing that just makes Rustic pretty unique in the travel biz is just we have 365-day operations in every country that we work with full-time local staff members in every country. It helps us on the ground when we're running programs, but also realistically, like the trip that you want to do on July 3rd this year doesn't start on July 3rd. Like Rustic Pathways is planning that a year, 2 years, 5 years in advance for a lot of these programs where we have like long-term commitments to building a school or building like water, trenches for water access into a community. So our staff members on the ground are the utmost of importance in just sort of developing that community relationship. And they're also then the people that are monitoring like real-time safety stuff. So if a hurricane happened in Fiji, or if there was political tensions in a country that we were traveling in, or there was potential, health concern, like in the Caribbean, we want to be able to have staff members on the ground that can get the appropriate information where we're not just like listening to, the news or the World Health Organization. So it's just a pretty unique aspect of Rustic Pathways when we have those components on the trip.
Connor, I just wanted to tag on and say that I was really surprised. So my daughter is what we call at our camp going into her V2 year, varsity 2, and then after that you become a junior counselor. And this summer they launched a new program for junior counselor, and so we all go to our little movie theater there, and parents, and they said, well, we're doing this with a partnership. And I had not even talked to the director of our camp, but I was impressed that you're doing things like expanding that experience. They chose Rustic Pathways. I know you were doing it with about 3 camps on the East Coast. I don't know about West Coast, but you are doing 3 where the kids in their junior counselor year. So my daughter will go with all of her friends and a couple of the camp counselors to Costa Rica and do a camp. Like they'll set up a camp. So that's just another interesting way. Like I began to see that Rustic Pathways was seeping into my daughter's life in different avenues. And I'm not gonna, like David said, I'm not getting paid or anything, but I will say it's worth every dollar. I mean, if you want the security and not to be nervous about anything, then you got to do an expensive trip like this. If you want to do something less expensive, the chances are I think you're going to be more nervous. And I've talked to people who've done other trips, and the quality with the education, the health background, and just the quality of the staff, I think is they always say your people are everything. I'm in talent acquisition. Your people are everything. And I think that's what really creates the parent experience. I mean, more than anything in terms of you sitting at home. I wasn't worried for one day. I mean, I was doing my own thing, and all before I knew it, the trip was over and I was rushing to the airport to get my daughter. So.
And that, I mean, even comparing other companies in, the student travel industry, we're kind of like in the middle of the price point. But it's interesting because we are like the leader in student travel in terms of like our student development goals, in terms of like safety standards. Like we set a lot of those standards for our industry that other people sort of match up to. So the price is maybe a little bit more expensive than some other organizations, but that's because, again, literally if you wanted to talk to someone in Morocco right now, we have staff members there. If you want to talk to our safety and risk management director about like what is happening in Thailand today, like we could set that phone call up for you. Like if you want to talk to our person that is in charge of student development goals. So when we're talking about like what are we expecting our students to get out of this program? We actually have like a new, we're like tying into like the UN's recent goals where there's like 19 like global issues that are like issues of focus, and making sure that every program that we do sort of fits those global standards. Like we just have resources that are not just like me, Connor, as a guide showing up 3 days before the program and saying like, let's paint this classroom. But really there's like a lot of intentional thought that comes into all of our programs.
The kids noticed that. My daughter noticed that. She did.
Awesome.
And the ratio I liked also the ratio once you're in the countries, the rate, like they have different, I just wanted to make it clear, there's different people who handle the kids at the airport. Those are not the same people that are going the trip themselves. So they have a separate staff for the airport, a separate staff inside of the corporate. I even talked to the 800 number once. I don't remember why, but the woman there was very nice. And then the and then the staff in the country and the chaperones, there was definitely, what is it, 3-to-1, Connor? I don't remember, but 3 or 4 kids to 1 chaperone.
On the actual, in the ground itself, there's at least 1 trip leader for every 7 students is our minimum ratio. It depends on the program. So some programs actually do have like a 3 or 4 to 1 student to staff ratio, which tend to be like our base house programs where we just have a ton of staff members. That doesn't include people like me. So during the summer, I'm like one of the like emergency phone resource people. Doesn't include any of those kind of ratios in those numbers. But as Melissa's sort of alluding to, like, this isn't our first rodeo. Like, we've been doing this for almost 40 years now. So like the process of it is like, there's a 24-hour emergency line. If you have anything that comes up on your end at 2 a.m, there's a number that you can call. It doesn't go necessarily, like that number doesn't connect you to Thailand. But as David mentioned, when he had an issue and he said within 10 or 15 minutes, I was talking to my son on the ground, you call the emergency phone, the person on the emergency phone gets in contact with our either country director or program leader on the ground. And then we sort of make that connection. We've got all these different resources in place because we're totally in the world or in the realm of saying, we would never tell people nothing is going to happen on your program because there's inherent risk when you walk outside your door every day. We're in the industry of saying, like, how do we identify all of the risks that could happen? How are we reducing those risks to make this the most safe potential program for someone to go on? And then what's our action plan if something happens? So if there's a family emergency in Texas, how does David get in contact with, his son in India? And how can we make that as streamlined as possible? Without having like false alarms or just making a really like clear and easy process for how that works. So we're super prepared in sort of like all of those situations, just having seen so many things over the last 40 years.
And I can vouch for that because, part of my research when we first looked at this was, we looked at other companies that did that. And like you said, it's not your first rodeo. That's a big Dallas expression. We love it down here, but it's like 40 years and I couldn't find anything bad. And I looked really hard, because it's your kids, right? And you obviously don't want, y'all don't want anything to happen to our kids either. That's bad for business. So, everyone's pulling in the rope in the same direction. But after the very first trip, it never crossed my mind, even going into, Costa Rica is one thing. Vietnam's another thing. Cambodia is a different thing. India is a different thing. Third world, countries that are just very different. And we were never worried.
Awesome.
Yeah, I actually urge everyone to read. I usually don't because the pace of life, you don't have time, but I was not nervous beforehand because I took the time to read all the sections on the website and they actually go into real detail and they have a risk group and this one leads the risk mitigation group. And I find that everyone's in information overload, but if you really step back and read, and that was something I took more seriously than anything else I do daily is, okay, my kid's going to Australia at 14. I only have one biological kid. I gotta be comfortable with this. Literally and figuratively. So I really took the time to read it. So because I'm like, I'm not going to send her on a trip that I have to even feel nervous about before the first trip. So for me, by the time we were even packing, that was it. This time she's getting back from camp and the next morning she leaves for Dominican. She said, Mom, it's so easy. I know what to pack. I'll be fine. And it's very seamless, very seamless.
Awesome. Well, we're already going long. I just love this chat. This was great. I'm just going to show really quickly. This is our website. If you haven't been to it, if you're still looking at my screen, heaps of information. As Melissa said, if you click on this menu button, you can click by like countries. A lot of this information, like how it works inside Rustic, you can learn about like our team, how we set up our student impact goals, how we set up our community, global community impact and community goals. You can read blogs, videos, all of that kind of stuff. Enrolling in the program is right here on the website as well. Heaps of information right there. So anything you need, always feel free, give us a call, shoot us an email. All that kind of information is on the website. We as staff members are always more than happy to help out. Unfortunately, David and Melissa are not, as they said, they're not paid spokespeople, so they're
but
not.
I'm a size large sweatshirt. Just FYI, forever needs to know.
And I'm a small, Connor.
A large and a small. I'll see what Jack can do for you. I'm sure we can
I'm just
get
kidding.
some goodie bag in the mail for you. But yeah, so with that, I actually think a lot of the Q&A section that parents had, we already incorporated into the conversation. So I'll just throw one final thing at David or Melissa. Do you have any like final parting comments for parents before we end the webinar?
Melissa, you go first.
David.
All right.
All right, I'll just say that honestly, I put a lot into the decision up front, and I'm really, really hoping my daughter continues this till college. I mean, you know, I'd love her to be involved in some way, even on the business side of it. I'm more than happy to ever answer anyone's questions, but I highly recommend this. I try to really put a lot into any decision I make, and I think I'm not saying this, I'm being completely transparent when I say there wasn't one thing that if we could change, I would change. I mean, my daughter is extremely picky, and I don't think there's anything she would change either. I mean, if I want to be, if I had to say one thing, you said, what is the one thing? She told me there was one boy, 14, which I think we all kind of know what a 14-year-old boy. She said this one kid was just always trying to annoy everybody on the trip, and she wished that the chaperone, I think, could have done something about him, but she knew, you know, Mom, there's always one of those, but that is the only thing I could come up with. I racked my brain because I don't want to be, there's always something, but there really was nothing that I would ask for differently, which I think is a testament to the organization and the way they're constantly evolving and inviting, like they did not prep myself and David. I want to say that, David.
Right.
Tell you the same thing. They didn't say, don't say this, say this. They did not say anything like that at all.
And Melissa, I'm sure you're the same. You know, and Connor, you're more than welcome to give my email address to people if they want to talk to me offline. I mean, we're not hiding anything. I will say that my kid was 14. He's a boy, but he was not into the Dominican, so he wasn't a creepy kid. Just,
he was there either.
but I would say it was probably the best experience and some of the greatest memories that my kids have and talk about, and the best gift you can give them. Again, the money, sure, it's expensive. You can send them, you know, an hour away to whatever camp they might go to in your hometown. They're getting so much more. The life experience they get on these trips is, you can't duplicate that. I mean, I'd pay twice as much. Well, you know, don't charge me, don't send me a bill, but it's worth it.
I just want to add in, what about year 2? And I mean, Connor, maybe you could just tail end with this, but, and I don't remember the name of what they call it, but you know, after you go 1 year,
Star alumni
invest back in you, as long as your kid isn't on the no list, which I don't think very many do, but, or maybe your kid just couldn't travel. It didn't work, or maybe, you know, they were too homesick or what have you, but they do, Connor, have that program, if you guys are all aware,
Yeah.
after you do one trip, and this is why I was laughing, my daughter picked the most expensive one first. You want to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe, and it's not including the airfare or spending money, but it is a 50% off of your, the actual trip cost.
Yeah, definitely. So it historically has been 50%. I think it will continue to be. You know, I can't promise that that'll be what it's like in 2024. But essentially what happens with like our on-the-ground vendors, so if you're a whitewater rafting company that we use, or if we're renting vehicles or using a hotel or something like that, when we pay for about a year in advance students coming in, we just get really great discounts. It's just how the travel industry works, sort of doing things in advance with big numbers of people. Rather than us take the discount amount, we just pass it along to families. It's a way for us to say like, hey, your student was awesome. They're continually like the part of the program that makes it wonderful, having other great students on the program. Like, what can we do to have you come back? Which is essentially, rather than us take that discount amount, we just pass it along to them. So it works for us. People are signed up a year in advance. Works for families. You get a great deal. Works for our on-the-ground vendors because they're getting cash for ziplining usually like a year in advance. So it just works out for everyone really well. There is some limitation on what time of year. So usually it goes through like mid-September, you know, early October-ish time every year. But yeah, there's always some kind of great alumni discount right when you get back.
I think that's great, because it's like anything else, to become part of something and not just a company and your kid going on a trip. So they're showing they're investing in you, and that kind of becomes more of a bonding thing where you have loyalty, they have loyalty, and they're they're taking care of you. They care about you and your family and your kid, and not just getting your money to take these kids on a trip. So I just wanted to kind of.
Totally.
Yeah. Good, Melissa. Good point. You do become part of the Rustic family. So like we've hosted events at our house, and I've even though my kids aren't doing them anymore, I've told them our house is always open. I mean, the gift that they gave us by showing the world to my children, we're forever grateful for. And so you become part of this advocate. You know, we're not getting paid, but Melissa and I could talk for the next 2 hours to every one of you about how great it is. And it's true. It's not bullshit.
I think our kids could too. And
yeah,
the last thing I'm going to sing is I had a big event and I got home one day and all of a sudden I saw this humongous thing of flowers on my door. And it was from my Rustic Pathway travel advisor. She sent me a holiday card. I sent her one. I mean, we're like friends. I mean, I feel like we're friends. I mean, and that is just like my daughter was sleepaway camp. If anyone does that, it's the same type of experience. But anyway, thank you everybody for.
Awesome. Yeah, no, y'all, thank you so much. You know, I really appreciate y'all taking the time, to talk about your experience. I think it really helps all of our families. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. Like I said, if you have any other questions, give us a call, shoot us an email. We're happy to help you out. Otherwise, thank you all so much for participating or asking your questions or just listening. We look forward to seeing you this summer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thanks, y'all too. Bye.